Welcome, Alison Repp. I'm so excited for this interview. I truly am.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here too.
Alison and I actually met previously at a women's retreat where we were both speakers, and she's very engaging, and I wanted to learn more. So this week's episode, we are going to be discussing mindfulness training.
Yeah, it's very exciting because I listen to a lot of stuff about mindfulness and nobody really says exactly how. Like there's not great specific steps. It's, gain awareness and start paying attention, but what my clients always ask me is how. And so I'm really excited to share the answers to that with you.
And I think before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you live and what do you do?
I live in Denver, Colorado, and I'm a psychotherapist and coach. And I have a really unique approach. The approach that I take as a therapist, and if you don't really know much about therapy training, which I'm guessing a lot of people don't, there are a lot of different approaches that you can take. They're called theories. And this approach that I take it because it really resonates with me. I apply everything to my own life. I've seen huge changes in my own life. And I'm not the kind of person who can keep that to myself. I want to share it with everybody else. And it's a way of approaching life and approaching yourself that allows you to be human and end the struggle that we often engage in with our thoughts and our emotions and all the things that are part of being human. And it's really grounded in East philosophy. So that's what I love about it. That's where this huge mindfulness piece comes into play also.
Well, and so we spoke previously, but you wanted to discuss mindfulness training and then that there are three parts to it through our thoughts, which create our emotions, and then being in the present moment.
Right, yes. So the first aspect that I always go into is our thoughts. And what people a lot of times don't realize is that your thoughts are separate from your emotions. They're very closely linked together, but people tend to think that thoughts and emotions are the same thing, especially if you believe your thoughts. And I always start with separating those two things because they're not the same at all. Thoughts create emotions and thoughts intensify emotions, but they're separate. So the first thing is thoughts, and thoughts are any strings of words put together. It's the part of your brain that's talking to you all the time. So those are our thoughts. And then emotions are what happens when we have a thought, and those we feel physically in our bodies. And we tend to really tune that out. And what happens when we tune out our emotions is they build and build and build until we get to a place of complete overwhelm, and then we have no idea what to do. And that's usually when clients come to see me, and we have to really work on slowing down that momentum. But let's go back to thoughts. Thoughts are, I describe them like a tornado. So our mind is always talking to us, and we tend to just jump into that tornado of thoughts like we don't have a choice. Like, oh, there's a tornado, guess I'm part of that now, spinning around in circles. And we have a choice. And when you're wrapped up in that tornado, it's completely all consuming and overwhelming. And we can't see other things, other paths, other things that are important to us. And if we continue this tornado metaphor, right, we don't really have a choice to go to safety or to make sure that people we love are safe. And, excuse me. And so what I help people to do is get some distance from that tornado. When you can get some distance from your thoughts, you have some objectivity. You can start to recognize that your thoughts are really just thoughts. And you don't have to internalize them. You have a choice with that. And when you can observe them, you can also start to recognize other paths to safety or things that are important to you. Does that make sense so far?
So what I want to ask you is, I call this monkey mind. Is that the same
Mm-hmm.
thing as kind of your tornado?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And we just get wrapped up in it. And there's a saying that I love. It's actually Tao Tzu. I think that's how you pronounce it. Or sorry, Lao Tzu. He says, if you're depressed, you are living in the past. If you're anxious, you are living in the future. If you're at peace, you're living in the present.
Yes, I've seen that.
And yeah, and that's something that I'm always going back to, because we get so wrapped up in our thoughts, which our thoughts are almost always about the past or the future.
Hmm.
And we just live in that place 95% of the time. And that 95% of the time is spent in 5% of our brain. That's the thinking part of our brain. And so then we start to have the emotions of anxiety and depression and sadness and guilt. And we don't think that we have a choice with that, and we do. So one of the main things that I want to give you some takeaways with this. One of the main things that I tell clients to do with your thoughts, to get some distance from your thoughts, is, first of all, you have to have awareness that you're having a thought. But then adding to the beginning of your thought, I'm noticing I'm having the thought, right? So instead of, let's say you're having a thought of, I'm ugly. Instead of just saying, I'm ugly, I'm ugly, I'm ugly to yourself, saying, I'm noticing I'm having the thought that I'm ugly. It kind of takes away the weight that that statement has, because you're getting that objectivity and you're able to look at that statement. And at that point, then you can say, is this helpful to me? And if it's creating an emotion that you don't want, it's not helpful to you, ever. Even if it's true. We don't care if it's true. We don't care if it's false. We're not here to judge the statements, other than, is it helpful to me? And if it's not, then you can add to the beginning of it, I'm noticing I'm having the thought that I'm ugly. And so that's how you start to get some of that distance from the tornado. We're not getting rid of the thoughts, because your mind is always going to be telling you things that are helpful or unhelpful. And so we don't want to start a war with trying to get rid of those thoughts. We just don't want them on full blast all the time.
So I think I've actually heard a statistic that we have somewhere near 60,000 thoughts per day. So how would you tell somebody, I mean, because our mind is going from the moment we wake up until we go to bed. And so having
Mm-hmm.
those constant thoughts and chatter in our head, how would you, because for some people that might be stressful or overwhelming to think, oh my gosh, now I have to be monitoring all my thoughts. Even if they're not serving me, how do I monitor all my thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's a great point. And the reality is, you don't have to have that many thoughts a day. That's kind of the goal of mindfulness, right? Is to not be wrapped up in that many thoughts per day. But when you have the habit of being so wrapped up in your mind and thinking thousands upon thousands of thoughts per day, it takes some time and effort at first. This isn't something that, okay, you walk away from this podcast episode and boom, you've got this down,
Yeah.
right? You've spent however old you are, that many years thinking all of these thoughts per day. And so it takes some time to start slowing that down. And so if you start gaining awareness of one thought per day to start, and then maybe two thoughts per day, and just start to set those kinds of intentions for yourself of having the awareness of what your mind is telling you, over time that becomes more habitual and it gets a lot easier.
So it's kind of like going to the gym. I always like to give analogies, but going to the gym, and you're not going to be like that ultimate rock star, fitness figure, but it's that daily repetition, consistency to slowly
Mm-hmm.
gain the momentum to then be aware and more in a flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about, and this is something I'm definitely working on, being more in the present moment, because as you noted, our thoughts tend to be, we're stuck in the past or we're planning for the future. So how can we hone in and focus on right now?
Well, first, the next step is, before we get to that, is emotions.
Okay.
So we've already talked about how to gain awareness of thoughts. Now, emotions. So I always like to tell people that the five main emotions that we have are joy, fear, anger, sadness, and guilt. And there's so many words that describe those feelings, levels of intensity of those feelings, but those are the five main feelings. If you've ever seen Inside Out, it's a great depiction of this. Although they use disgust instead of guilt, so there's some debate about that, but we have these main emotions, and we spend so much time running away from them, pushing them down. And like I mentioned before, the more time that we spend trying to ignore them, and they continuously come back because we're human and we are meant to feel human feelings, then the more intense they become. And we might start with some anxiety and we run from that, and then here it is again. So now we have anxiety about our anxiety, and then we have anger about our anxiety, and then we have sadness about our anger about, right? So you get what I'm saying. And instead of trying to push down the emotions or run away from the emotions or change the emotion from sadness to happiness, the first step that we have to take is recognizing where we feel that emotion in our bodies, and breathe into it and make some room for it and let it be there. What we typically do is get really tight around those emotions and our body's trying to do something with it to get rid of it. And so this is really counterintuitive. This is something that really takes a lot of practice. But recognizing where it is in your body, breathing into it, opening up to it, accepting it. And that's when you'll be amazed at how much that feeling decreases. Sometimes it might stay the same, but it's not intensifying anymore when you do that.
So is what you're saying, and I think what I'm catching on is that when we have those feelings, we tend to hold them and get stressed out trying to change them. If instead, if we're feeling sadness or anger, whatever it may be, and actually I was telling a friend of mine this last night, he was going through something, but I was like, he was very upset. And I was like, that's okay. Feel the feelings, feel it fully, right? Embrace it. If you need to cry, cry, and then let it go.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, you have to allow yourself to feel the human feelings. Our feelings are like little children saying, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. And if you try to ignore them, they get louder and louder and louder, right? So we have to give them that acknowledgement and let ourselves feel them. Now, letting yourself feel it while at the same time having awareness of the thoughts coming into your head that might continue to intensify it. A lot of times when we say, let yourself feel it, I'll see people start telling them stories that intensify it so that they can really feel it, the feeling, right? And that's actually counterproductive. So we want to put these two things together. They're not completely separate steps. So you let yourself feel the emotion while also noticing, oh, my mind is trying to take me down further into this emotion. It's telling me stories that are pulling me down further. So I'm noticing I'm having that thought. Still breathing into this emotion, noticing I'm having a thought, breathing into the emotion. That makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. So those are the first two elements of this. And now the third one is contacting the present moment. And this is really simple, actually. It's paying attention to what's around you. And one of my favorite things is tuning into the five senses. So in this moment, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you taste? What do you smell? And what feelings do you have in or around your body? There's other ones as well. There's an exercise when you're taking a shower. Are you actually in the shower? Right? So do you feel all of the drops of water hitting your back? Do you feel what it feels like to rub the shampoo in your hair? Do you feel the warmth? Do you feel the steam that you're breathing in? Or you can do mindful eating. What does the food feel like in your mouth? And these are just ways to practice contacting the present moment. And as you practice these things, you start to get better and better at it, just like any of the other things that we've talked about.
I think it's also that whole slowing down, because otherwise we're so used to being busy and hurried through everything, and kind of what you just went through with the shower and mindful eating, similar with brushing your teeth. Like, when is the last time you actually tasted the toothpaste?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or, I mean, we tend to not really like to brush our teeth. So, that's a great one too. Tasting what that tastes like. Can you smell anything when you breathe into your nose? Can you feel the little like droplets of toothpaste, or I don't know what they're called, but anyway, flying around in your mouth? It's going to take the same amount of time to brush your teeth, paying attention to what the experience is like, and keeping your head somewhere else and trying to distract yourself. One, in the long run, is much more fulfilling, because where our head tends to go if we get caught up in that is future or past. That's anxiety or depression in the long run.
Yes. Oh, that was awesome. And I know we could literally talk about this for probably hours, but I love kind of just honing in on getting a glimpse of it and then being able to contact you for further. If listeners want to get a hold of you, what is your website or social media handles?
My website is www.innerfreedomcounseling.com.
Okay.
And I think you'll post, instead of me trying to say my username on Instagram. I'm on Instagram. I'm starting a vlog shortly. Actually, this week I'll be posting my first video, so you can sign up to get notifications for that as well.
Awesome. Yes, I will include all of that in the notes. And then I always love to end my episodes with a couple of rapid fire questions for you. So whatever comes to mind first. Just what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Oh, so many. I have to choose one. One piece of advice would be to not care about pleasing others as much. Focusing on doing what feels good to me rather than looking to others to feel good.
That's a good one. Huge.
Mm-hmm.
What book are you currently reading?
I am reading Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. He is amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And finally, what is a quote you live by?
There are so many quotes that I love, but actually, there's a quote that I always say to people, and it's actually my quote, so hopefully that doesn't sound too, conceited. But it really applies to everything I feel. It's that we tend to live life as victims of our circumstances rather than creators of our experiences.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it comes from other people, things that I've read, but that's just what I've put together, being the creator of your experience.
Well, way to end on a high note. Alison, thank you so much for joining for this week.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.